The anticipation surrounding Elon Musk's appearance on The Late Show had been building for weeks. Any time Musk sat down for an interview, it was bound to stir conversation, but this time the stakes felt different. The billionaire had found himself at the center of yet another controversy, accused by critics of fostering a work culture that marginalized minorities, failing to address racism within his companies, and making public statements that some had interpreted as racially insensitive. Stephen, never one to shy away from confrontation, had made it clear in the days leading up to the episode that he intended to hold Musk accountable. The monologue that opened the show hinted at the tension to come, pointed jabs at Musk's handling of social issues, subtle but undeniable suggestions that the billionaire's success had come at the expense of others. By the time Musk stepped onto the stage, the atmosphere had already shifted. The interview started predictably, with Stephen acknowledging Musk's achievements, his ventures into space travel, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence. But the pleasantries were short-lived. It wasn't long before the conversation took a sharp turn, with Stephen pressing Musk on the accusations that had been following him for months. He brought up reports of racial discrimination lawsuits at Tesla, allegations of unfair treatment toward black employees, and Musk's own comments on affirmative action, which many had found controversial. Musk, unfazed, responded in his usual detached manner, pushing back against the premise of the question rather than engaging with it directly. He dismissed the accusations as misinterpretations, the product of a media landscape obsessed with vilifying successful entrepreneurs. He argued that his companies hired the best talent regardless of background, and that the real issue wasn't race, but meritocracy. But Stephen wasn't satisfied. He pressed harder, challenging Musk's perspective with statistics, first-hand accounts from whistleblowers, and references to past remarks that had stirred backlash. He pointed out that ignoring systemic issues didn't make them disappear, that success didn't absolve responsibility. As the conversation intensified, the once playful energy of the interview evaporated. Musk's responses grew shorter, more clipped. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual air of control slightly rattled by the persistence of the interrogation. He attempted to steer the conversation back to his vision for the future, advancements in AI, space colonization, the promise of a multi-planetary civilization, but Stephen wasn't letting it go. The host made it clear, this wasn't about Mars or Tesla or Twitter. This was about accountability. Then came the moment that changed everything. Stephen, emboldened by the rising tension, made a remark that cut deeper than the rest. It was no longer a question, no longer a challenge. It was an outright accusation. The audience reacted immediately, murmurs rippling through the studio as the weight of the statement settled in. Musk stiffened. His expression darkened, the flicker of amusement that had lingered at the edges of his responses now completely gone. He leaned forward, his voice colder, sharper. If Stephen wanted a fight, he was going to get one. The tension had reached its breaking point, and there were still 3 segments left. The energy in the studio shifted dramatically as Musk sat forward, his usual calculated demeanor giving way to something more raw, more direct. Stephen, sensing he had struck a nerve, didn't back down. If anything, he leaned into the moment, pushing Musk to answer the question he had so skillfully danced around. The host wasn't satisfied with evasions or vague justifications. He wanted Musk to admit on national television that he had contributed to a culture of racial insensitivity, that his own words had fueled division. But Musk wasn't going to play along. His response was sharper this time, dismissing the entire line of questioning as an orchestrated attempt to frame him as something he wasn't. He made it clear that he wasn't going to apologize just to appease a media narrative he believed was fundamentally flawed. His companies, he argued, were built on innovation, not politics. If Stephen wanted a scapegoat, he'd have to look elsewhere. The audience reaction was split. Some clapped in support of Musk's defiance, while others murmured uneasily at the growing hostility. Stephen, ever the showman, used the reaction to fuel the fire. He reminded Musk that power without accountability was dangerous, that being a billionaire didn't put him above criticism. He pulled up past statements Musk had made on social media, comments about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, dismissals of systemic racism, his insistence that talent alone should dictate opportunity. Musk's patience was wearing thin. His responses grew sharper, laced with an edge that hadn't been there before. He accused Stephen of twisting his words, of playing into a larger media ecosystem designed to take down successful figures simply because they didn't conform to a particular ideology. He didn't deny that problems existed in the world, but he made it clear he wasn't responsible for fixing them. His job was to innovate, to push humanity forward, not to play referee in a never-ending culture war. Stephen saw an opening. He pointed out that Musk had never hesitated to wade into political debates when it suited him. His criticisms of progressive policies, his involvement in free speech discussions on social media, his vocal opposition to unions. Yet now, when confronted with accusations that directly implicated him, he suddenly wanted to separate himself from politics. The hypocrisy, Stephen argued, was glaring. Musk let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor behind it. He leaned back, arms crossed, eyes locked onto Stephen in a way that made it clear he was recalibrating his approach. He accused Stephen of being part of a larger machine that thrived on outrage, that took complex issues, and reduced them to sound bites designed to provoke, not inform. If anyone here was being dishonest, Musk implied, it wasn't him. The studio was silent for a moment, the air thick with the weight of the confrontation. It was no longer just an interview, it was a battle of narratives. Stephen, representing the progressive media establishment, hammering away at Musk's perceived moral failings. And Musk, the self-styled disruptor, refusing to concede an inch, painting himself as the victim of a media desperate to tear him down. Then Stephen made his move. He accused Musk of being more than just ignorant. He suggested that Musk's views weren't just out of touch, but dangerous. He linked Musk's statements to the rise of certain extremist ideologies, implying that whether Musk intended it or not, his rhetoric had given cover to more insidious forces. He demanded to know if Musk was even aware of the people who rallied behind his words, the ones who used his statements to justify their own bigotry. That was the final straw. Musk's expression hardened, his frustration boiling over into something more cutting, more personal. He threw the accusation back at Stephen, claiming that it was people like him who fueled division, who thrived on controversy while pretending to champion unity. He called out the hypocrisy of late-night hosts who built entire careers off mockery, then had the audacity to lecture others on morality. The crowd erupted, some gasping, some cheering, the entire studio crackling with the kind of energy that only comes from a moment spiraling completely out of control. Stephen, momentarily taken aback, regrouped quickly. He wasn't about to let Musk take control of the narrative. He reminded the audience of Musk's immense influence, his reach, his power. He argued that with that power came responsibility, that Musk couldn't just shrug off criticism by claiming victimhood. If he truly believed in a meritocracy, he should be willing to engage with the real-world consequences of his words and actions. Musk wasn't interested in being lectured. His voice was sharper now, laced with a level of irritation that hadn't been there at the start. He called out Stephen's hypocrisy directly, mocking the idea that a millionaire comedian was in any position to lecture him on responsibility. He reminded Stephen that he wasn't an elected official, that he wasn't bound to any ideology beyond pushing technological advancement. If people wanted a moral leader, they could look elsewhere. The conversation had devolved into a full-on battle, no longer a discussion but an outright war of egos. The audience had become part of the spectacle, reacting loudly to every barb, every accusation, every counterpunch. The air felt electric, unpredictable, like anything could happen next. Stephen, seeing the interview slipping from his control, pushed one last time, framing Musk's refusal to engage as proof of guilt. If he had nothing to hide, why was he so defensive? Why not just admit that his words had been careless, that he could do better? Musk wasn't having it. His response was cold, cutting, final. He made it clear that he didn't owe anyone an apology, least of all Stephen. He painted the entire conversation as nothing more than a political stunt, a desperate attempt to turn him into the villain of the moment. And he wasn't playing along. The audience was now fully divided, some applauding Musk's defiance, others booing at his refusal to take responsibility. Stephen, sensing that he had done all he could to break through, sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The tension in the room was at a boiling point, and there were still 2 sections left. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a battle neither man was willing to lose. The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, and there was no coming back from it. The illusion of a standard late-night interview had completely disintegrated, leaving only the raw, unfiltered clash between 2 powerful figures, both unwilling to concede. Stephen, still seated with a carefully controlled expression, gave off the air of someone who had been in these kinds of debates before, someone who knew how to drag a guest into deeper waters and force them to sink under their own weight. Musk, on the other hand, had abandoned his initial composure. His responses were sharper now, his words laced with barely restrained contempt. He made it clear he saw through the act. He accused Stephen of using this interview as nothing more than a performance, a carefully orchestrated attempt to paint him as a villain for the sake of ratings and applause. He argued that nothing he said would ever satisfy someone like Stephen, because Stephen wasn't interested in a real discussion, only in playing the righteous interrogator. The audience reaction was immediate. Some cheered at Musk's defiance, while others groaned in disapproval, sensing that the interview was spiraling into something more aggressive than they had expected. Stephen wasn't about to let Musk regain control of the narrative. He pushed harder, leaning into the argument with a relentless force that left no room for Musk to maneuver. He pointed out that Musk's actions, his comments about race, his dismissals of social issues, his policies at Twitter, had real consequences. He asked Musk if he ever considered the impact of his words before he sent them out to millions of followers. He painted a picture of a man so blinded by his own success that he couldn't see the damage he was doing. Musk's reaction was immediate and unfiltered. He scoffed at the idea that he should be held responsible for how people reacted to his words. He accused Stephen of engaging in the very same tactics he claimed to oppose, reducing complex issues to soundbites, assigning blame without real understanding. He challenged Stephen directly, turning the tables on him. If Stephen was so concerned about morality, why did he spend his career making jokes at the expense of others? Why did he thrive off political division while pretending to stand for unity? The question hit harder than expected. For the first time in the conversation, Stephen hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. He recovered quickly, brushing off the accusation, but Musk had seen the flicker of uncertainty and seized on it. He pushed further, accusing Stephen of being part of a media establishment that thrived on controversy and conflict, only to turn around and act shocked when things got messy. The audience was no longer sure how to react. The energy in the room had shifted from amusement to discomfort, then back to anticipation. They weren't just watching an interview anymore, they were watching a collision. Stephen, now visibly more agitated, pushed back with even more force. He called Musk out for his hypocrisy, pointing out that Musk himself played the media game just as much as anyone else. Musk had built his brand on controversy, on calculated chaos. He had used Twitter to manipulate public perception, to stoke division when it suited him. Now, faced with real pushback, he was trying to frame himself as the victim. Musk's expression darkened. The accusation was too familiar, too often repeated by those who wanted to discredit him. He didn't deny that he was a disruptor. He embraced it. But he made it clear that he saw a difference between disruption for progress and manipulation for control. He accused Stephen of being nothing more than a mouthpiece for the establishment, someone who claimed to challenge power, but only ever went after the convenient targets. He argued that Stephen's entire career had been built on mocking people. Like him, people who actually built things, who took risks, who didn't just sit behind a desk and talk. The jab landed hard, and Stephen's patience finally snapped. His voice took on a sharper edge as he responded, making it clear that he had no intention of backing down. He called Musk arrogant, self-absorbed, unwilling to listen to criticism. He accused Musk of surrounding himself with sycophants, of living in an echo chamber where no one dared to challenge him. Musk's reaction was immediate. His eyes narrowed, his posture stiffened. He fired back with a level of disdain that left no room for misinterpretation. He dismissed Stephen as just another cog in the machine, someone who thought he was fighting for justice, when he was really just another pawn in the media circus. He called out the hypocrisy of a millionaire comedian lecturing a billionaire entrepreneur on responsibility, arguing that Stephen had no real stake in the world beyond his own ratings and applause. The tension was unbearable now, suffocating the studio in a way that left everyone frozen in place. The audience barely reacted this time, not because they weren't invested, but because they knew something was about to break. Stephen, realizing that the conversation was slipping beyond even his ability to control, made one final push. He demanded that Musk take accountability, that he acknowledge the harm his words had caused, that he stop hiding behind the excuse of being a businessman and start acting like someone who understood the weight of his influence. Musk, having reached his limit, made it clear he had nothing left to say. His expression was ice-cold, his words clipped, final. He dismissed the entire discussion as a waste of time, an exercise in manufactured outrage. He made it clear he wasn't going to play, along with a game designed to tear him down. The audience was now fully divided, some standing in applause, others sitting in stunned silence. The moment felt like it had gone too far, past the point of entertainment and into something deeply personal, deeply uncomfortable. Stephen sat back, exhaling slowly, watching Musk with an expression that was equal parts frustration and triumph. He had pushed Musk to the brink, forced him to reveal the raw emotion behind the carefully crafted public persona. But Musk hadn't broken. He had fought back with just as much force, just as much determination. The final moments of the interview teetered on the edge of chaos. The air in the studio was heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had been said. Stephen, emboldened by the momentum of the argument, leaned forward with renewed intensity, making it clear he wasn't finished with Musk. He was going to push him all the way, force him to admit something, anything, that would justify the relentless attack he had launched from the start. He wanted a confession, an admission of guilt, or at the very least, a moment where Musk's mask of control slipped just enough for him to look like the villain. But Musk had no intention of playing along. His expression was stone cold now, his body language rigid, signaling that he had reached his limit. Whatever amusement he might have entertained earlier in the debate had long since disappeared. He wasn't just countering Stephen's arguments anymore. He was treating them with outright disdain. The way he looked at the host now was different, no longer humoring the back and forth, but regarding him as a nuisance, an obstacle barely worth engaging with. The tension escalated when Stephen doubled down, throwing Musk's own past statements back at him, framing them in a way designed to corner him. He painted a picture of a man who hid behind intellectualism and technological ambition, using them as a shield to justify his worst impulses. He accused Musk of fostering division, of using his platform to embolden the worst aspects of society, of being reckless with his influence. The audience was split. Some were enthralled by Stephen's takedown, cheering him on as he unleashed every argument he had prepared in advance. Others were shifting in their seats, unsettled by how hostile the interview had become. The usual humor, the performative edge that defined Stephen's clashes with controversial figures, was gone. This wasn't playful. It was a battle. Musk, now fully done with the charade, barely concealed his contempt as he responded. He dismissed the accusations outright, refusing to be forced into some forced moral reckoning just because a late-night host demanded it. He made it clear he saw, through the act, that Stephen was no champion of justice, no protector of truth. He was a performer, someone who thrived on the spectacle of tearing others down while pretending to stand on moral high ground. But Stephen wasn't backing off. If anything, he escalated even further, raising his voice, making it clear he wasn't afraid to challenge Musk head-on. He accused Musk of thinking himself untouchable, of believing his wealth and power shielded him from criticism. He pointed out how Musk had cultivated a following that treated him like a messiah, unwilling to accept that he was just another billionaire playing with the world like a toy. Musk's patience was gone. He leaned in, his expression darkening, his voice cutting through the noise with a finality that silenced even the most vocal members of the audience. He fired back at Stephen with an icy precision, tearing apart the hypocrisy of a multi-millionaire TV host, lecturing him about power and influence. He pointed out how Stephen himself had built his entire career on being a mouthpiece for the very establishment he claimed to challenge. He called him out for the way he catered to his audience, feeding them whatever narrative they wanted to hear, never once stepping outside his comfort zone to challenge his own beliefs. The room was now pure electricity. Stephen's face twitched with barely contained frustration. The confidence he had wielded so effortlessly at the start of the interview had cracked just slightly, just enough for Musk to see that he had landed his blows exactly where he wanted. Then, Stephen tried one last maneuver, one final attempt to push Musk over the edge. He threw out a parting shot, a biting remark designed to elicit an emotional reaction, to humiliate Musk in front of a live audience. It was a gamble, one that either would completely derail Musk or finally provoke him into saying something he would regret. But Musk didn't take the bait. He didn't lash out, didn't explode with anger. Instead, he did something worse. He let the silence drag out, let the weight of the moment settle. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he pushed back his chair and stood up. The studio was deathly still. Everyone realized what was happening before it even fully registered. Musk wasn't going to keep playing the game. He wasn't going to sit there and allow Stephen to dictate the narrative any longer. He was done. Stephen, caught off guard, scrambled to maintain control. He tried to spin the moment, to reframe Musk's exit as cowardice, as an inability to handle criticism. But it didn't land the way he wanted. The moment wasn't playing out as a triumph, it was something else entirely. Musk wasn't leaving in defeat. He was walking away in defiance, refusing to give Stephen the satisfaction of an orchestrated conclusion. As Musk made his way off the stage, the audience remained frozen. Some cheered, others booed, but the majority simply sat in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The cameras captured every second, every flicker of emotion on Stephen's face as he tried to salvage the moment, but the damage was done. Musk had left the building, and the interview had ended in the most unpredictable way possible. Not with a victory for Stephen, not with a satisfying conclusion, but with a raw, unresolved clash that no one could easily explain. And just like that, the episode of The Late Show had cemented itself in history, not as a witty back and forth, not as a humorous political takedown, but as a full-scale battle that left both men with their legacies altered.